Good evening. My name is John Strong, and it's my privilege tonight to introduce Hiram M. Lake as an inductee of the Bellwether League for 2017. Unfortunately, Hi passed away in 2016, but we're honored to have a number of his family members with us tonight, and they'll be receiving the award. Prior to, Hi was an early practitioner of materials management and healthcare, starting when he was hired by St. Mary's Hospital, part of the Mayo Clinic group in Rochester, Minnesota, in August of 1975. He was not only an early practitioner, but I would argue that he was an early pioneer in many respects in materials management and supply chain. Prior to what we now call supply chain management, Hi and his wife Mary attended Nyack College in New York, and in 1950 he was asked to speak about missionary work in the Pacific cultures at Carnegie Hall. From there, Hi and Mary spent about 8 years in Denai, notably translating portions of the Bible and using his mechanical skills to fix almost anything from building airstrips to radios, engines, almost anything that needed fixing at all. He also built 5 houses in Denai. Upon returning, Hi completed his college at Wheaton College here in Chicago, majoring in anthropology. It's sort of an interesting transition to materials management from anthropology, but Hi actually used a tool that he learned there called participant observation. And he spent months helping design the material flow for the new ORs at St. Mary's. And those elevators are actually still in use today. Hi wrote numerous articles on materials management, and I'm certain as a young materials manager, I remember reading some of those articles to help build concepts and principles in the hospitals that I was starting out at, and I'm sure others did as well. I thought the name Hi was pretty cool. I remember him for the name Hi, and I didn't find out until a couple of weeks ago that he actually didn't like the name Hiram, and so he shortened it to Hi. He served on the editorial board of Hospital Material Management, publication from the 70s well into the 90s, and I was a fan of that publication as well and remember some of his articles. Hi was very well known to have coached and mentored numerous healthcare material management professionals and leaders, both in hospitals and really throughout the healthcare industry. His articles provided real-world examples and challenges, but most importantly, I think, the solutions that he recommended to people are some of the things that I remember most. I think it's still one of the reasons that I do remember him. His writing motivated, encouraged, and provided endless guidance to young material professionals across the country. Bellwether did a fair amount of research about Hi, and I love the terms that have been used to describe Hi Lake. They include missionary, minister, love of the outdoors, love of nature, lifelong learner, mentor, friend, materials management executive, coach, and having an impeccable set of ethics. Terms we all hope, I think, to be remembered by someday. In one of the interviews conducted to find background on Hi, his son Larry was asked, if your father were here, were to have encouraged someone either outside of healthcare or just out of school to enter the healthcare supply chain and strive to be a future Bellwether League honoree, what would he have told them? And Larry's immediate response was he probably would have said, this is an important job and it's worth doing well. So many lives depend on the quality of the work that we do. As I said, a number of Hi's family is here tonight, and I'd like to invite his son Larry up to receive this recognition on behalf of his father, Hiram M. Lake. Larry?
Good evening, everyone. I'm very thankful, and our family is very thankful for the Bellwether League's recognition of my dad and his work. I want to thank the board here and all of you for the kind of work that you do every day. And if my dad were here, he would be very interested in hearing many of your stories. He had a few stories of his own, and I was told, he told me quite early in his career, that in order to save time in having people visit his office, mostly vendors and suppliers, he did not have pictures on the wall that depicted anything about his life in New Guinea. When I was 5 years old, and my sister, who is here tonight as well, was 3 years old, we traveled to New Guinea for 8 years of missions work. That was an unusual career move in those days, and probably still would be. Dad had been working with IBM and with General Electric as a buyer of electronic parts in their plants in Endicott and Johnson City, New York. But then he and my mom felt the call of the Lord to go to New Guinea to work with a culture that had been discovered only 17 years before. It was in 1938 that the explorer Richard Archbold had flown his seaplane over a part of New Guinea that everyone thought was pretty much uninhabited, and found out that there were 150,000 people living there that didn't know anything about the rest of the world. So my family and about 8 other mission families worked in the Balim Valley among the Dani culture for those 8 years. And in those years, we had a few very interesting experiences. One time, one of the very angry local leaders decided that they would burn down our house. And since our aluminum house hadn't been built yet, we were living in a grass shack at the edge of the airstrip, which we were still working on. It wasn't finished yet. So late one night, a group of these people moved quietly through the woods toward our house. Dad had figured out a way to hopefully escape because rumors had come to us that we were targets. And so he dismantled, and for Dad, who always liked to build things and make sure things were put together well and carefully constructed, he had to do the unthinkable, which was to deconstruct part of the back wall of the grass house so that we could easily move through it if a fire started and escape. We couldn't escape through the front door because the Dani tactic was to have a group of warriors lined up with 15-foot spears or arrows or both and shoot the inhabitants as they ran out of a burning house. So you can imagine that Dad wouldn't want to spend a lot of his working time telling this story or others like it to those who visited. I have understood in the past few years, though, that he got close to his workers in the warehouse and at other places in the hospital, and many of them have heard many of his stories. He apparently regaled them about cannibal feasts and pig feasts during lunchtime, of all things. I would guess that another thing that Dad might point out if he were here is that those years of confronting angry warriors who were wielding 15-foot spears and negotiating with them was actually very good training for working with vendors. I might also add that not all of the Dani people were angry at us or wanted to get rid of us. Many of them really appreciated what we had brought them. Dad and Mom were very instrumental in teaching the written language to that culture, because before we got there, they had never written their language down. My parents and others were involved in translating the Bible for that particular culture. And by the time we left in 1965, there was a small but very dedicated group of new Christians. And in the years since then, that has grown into a group of thousands. Dad's work in your field grew then out of a multitude, a plethora, if I may use that word again tonight, of real life experiences. And I know that if he were here, he would want to thank many of you who he probably knew quite well for the ways that he was able to learn from you. And of course, we're thankful for the things that we've been able to learn from Dad and from other leaders like him. Thank you.